Hey guys, it's Sam, and today I'm going to talk about some books and authors that I feel are underrated. I say underrated in quotes because a lot of these authors are authors that you're going to recognize, that a lot of people do talk about, but that I still feel in the grand scheme of things are not talked about or gushed about or rated as highly as some other authors. Like, I think these authors should be on the same tier as like Leigh Bardugo, Cassandra Clare, Sarah J Maas. I'm using all YA authors, but there's obviously really popular adult authors. But that's just the tier that I want them to be on, that they're not on, even though they are probably well-liked, well-talked about. Because I've talked about this before with BookTube and like the book community online in general. Like, I know myself and a lot of other people don't tend to read books until they've been like recommended a number of times, because you just want to like invest your time in things you really are going to enjoy. So I tend to read a lot of books and authors that people know and have heard of. So it's not like under-discussed books or authors, but just ones that I feel like should be higher ranked in people's hearts and on people's TBRs than they are. So the first author and set of books I'm going to talk about is Claire Legrand. Now, I've read 3 of her books now, and I started with Winterspell, which was one of her earlier books. This was pitched as a Nutcracker retelling. It's not really, but it's dark and twisty and really good villain and main character dynamics. She is great at that. All of her books have that dynamic in there. It's not like villain main character romance, so don't get all like persnickety if you're not into that. Just like they have always a very compelling, interesting dynamic between the villain and the main character in all of her books. So I started with Winterspell when it was super low expectations because everyone like either didn't talk about it or was like, oh, it's not that good, and I really enjoyed it. Then I think I read Furyborn next, I want to say. And I do have the second book, Kingsbane, that I do want to read. I've just been in, like a fantasy slump lately with my anxiety. But loved this as well. Again, villain main character dynamic, so good. And then I also love Sawkill Girls, which I read last year, which is like a fantasy horror. Me last year was in a much better place mental health-wise. But this is like a contemporary fantasy, dark fantasy, horror elements in it. But again, really compelling characters and interactions and stuff, and has a female-female romance in here, and I think also an ace character. Yes. So good. So dark, so twisty, but like not too dark. Like it's not like super goth if you're not into that, but like really good. And I feel like people don't appreciate. She's gotten a little bit more with Sawkill Girls and then Furyborn. I feel like Furyborn is like rising up the ranks a little bit in people's hearts, but still not at the level. This should be like Sarah J Maas level. Come on. Then we have Susan Dennard, and specifically Truthwitch. I know this series is getting more popular as the books come out, but it's still like not at the level it should be. Guys, like I'm just like she should be Leigh Bardugo level. She should be Sarah J Maas level. She should be like, and she's below, like I would say like a step below them, but like deserves to be the top rank. Like, what are you guys sleeping on with this series? Like, I don't actually understand. I know some people like couldn't get into Truthwitch and whatever, but like honestly, if you like YA fantasy that's a little bit older, as far as like the characters being older, you like a really interesting magic system, you like a really interesting like lore and almost like religions and a variety of characters and lots of potential ships, but that the plot doesn't focus on like just the ships, so there's a lot to choose from if you're like really into that. Kind of like if you watch Grey's Anatomy, there's always like a relationship thing going on, but like that's not the main plot. The main plot is like the medical things. Why isn't everyone shouting about this series from the mountains? I don't understand. If you like angsty romances, if you like, not angsty romances, if you really enjoy just like interesting family dynamics, found families, friends, and friends being family, female friendship, bonds, I can continue to go on because I'm actively mad at people that like aren't talking about this more. Like, I get it if you didn't like it, whatever. But again, should be like Grishaverse level. Like, her writing is like top tier. It's so good. And just like the way that she has foreshadowed things and how layered and complex this is, like it's top tier work, guys. And people are sleeping on it, and I'm mad. Then we have Jessica Clueless with the Kingdom on Fire series. The first book being Shadow Bright and Burning, I almost forgot. This series, again, should be like way more popular than it is. I can see it maybe not being like top tier Cassandra Clare. I'm comparing this more to Cassandra Clare because I feel like it kind of falls in line with that. But this is a like darker YA fantasy in a Victorian London setting with different kinds of magic users like magicians, sorcerers, and witches that all use magic kind of differently. And like the main character discovers that she's like the only sorceress because sorcerers are like magically all men. Anyway, that's so good. And I'm getting on a tangent. There's these like eldritch beings that have come through from another dimension and they're like fighting those things, but it's like so good, so dark. There is like a love triangle square thing that I have mentioned before with these books that I don't tend to mind because like none of the people in the square are the right choice. Like they're all like a little bad. And I just kind of love that. If you love sweet, wholesome things always, you might have a hard time. But I really like it. The main character's like snarky, like it's just really fun. And this author is now currently coming out with like a dragon series about dragons. So I just feel like she's really underappreciated and people didn't pick up this book, and I didn't pick up this book for the longest time, not knowing that it was like a Victorian London setting. I feel like they need to rebrand these and they would be much more popular. But so good. Okay, I know this author is like fairly old school popular, but I feel like people have forgotten her, and that is Kristen Cash and the Graceling series. This is very like classic YA at this point. A lot of people know about it, but I don't feel like that many people people don't know. Like the youths don't know to read this series, you know? And I'm like, this though, this is like the quality YA fantasy that I got into YA fantasy because of. Read it. So this is all a companion trilogy and the world is really interesting, and the main thread throughout the stories, even though they're in different timelines, is the villain. But I'm not necessarily even saying that the villain is like present in all of those cases. I know it's all very mysterious, but if you read this series, it'll make sense. I really like the characters in all of these books. There's some crossover characters, but they each follow a different protagonist. And just like the world and how like complex and layered it is, and just how Kristen Cash makes you feel like for these characters when you first meet them. She also is able to establish character relationships with very few lines, where you don't feel like you need all of this like time spent with them. Like you're able to see like what their relationship has been from the past and things like that. So good. So good. And people like don't know. And she also has a newer book that I didn't love as much. It was called Jane Unlimited because it was like a multiple like string theory, what's that? Like alternate realities type book, which was kind of weird, but her writing is still great. And I will continue to read things that she puts out, even though she barely puts out books at this point, and she puts out a book like once every 4 or 5 years. It's fine. Then we have Rae Carson, but specifically the Girl of Fire and Thorn series. I tried to read her second series that she wrote and didn't really like it as much, but Girl of Fire and Thorns is an underrated series I talk about a lot. Again, as far as YA fantasy, really good. I haven't gone back and read it since it came out. I know it's like yeah, this came out in like 2012. This is the second book in the series, so it is probably gonna have some of that like 2012 YA feeling to it, but I love the setting. Pretty much every main character in here is a person of color, Hispanic, like a Latina origin. It's a fantasy world, so it's not Latina, but you know, like everybody has like a Spanish influence, and there's like their religion is sort of like Catholicism with magic at times, and it's just really interesting. The main character is plus size, and that's a part that's like brought up throughout the story. And the romance, because I gotta always mention that, is slow burn. Slow burn. With another trope that like I want to mention, but I don't. Fuck it. There's like a princess slash queen and the guardsman thing going on. I know, it's one of my favorite tropes I've talked about before, like the princess and the guard or the queen and the guard or whatever. I love it, and it's like kind of hard to find, so it's in here, and it's slow burn. Read it. Oh, and it's slow burn, but also like really healthy. I just love it. There's a couple other books in here that I want to mention, but I haven't continued on with the series, so I want to give it more of a shot. But there's one more author that I want to mention that is an adult author. And that is Robert Jackson Bennett with Foundry Side specifically, because I haven't read his first series yet, but I hear it's great. So as far as authors, again, not necessarily like underrated or not known or whatever, but still I feel like in booktube world, Robert Jackson Bennett isn't discussed as much as like Brandon Sanderson and like Patrick Rothfuss and George R. R. Martin and stuff like that. And I love this series so far, this first book. He does city fantasy, so it's not like urban fantasy in the traditional sense of like, you know, like the paranormal urban fantasy, but he does cities and the setting as a character in and of itself really well. And then the magic in here is really cool because it's mostly like inscribing on objects to make them do things. So like our technology would really be magic in this world, but they would use like it to inscribe things. So to make like a wheel turn, they would inscribe certain magic on it. And there's like merchant guilds that are controlling things, so they feel like kind of mafia-like, and all of the main characters kind of fit a certain archetype, like a sort of like mad magician or like a lawful good kind of character and like a thief, but those archetypes get kind of twisted and turn on their head and they like make them their own kind of thing. So it's so good. And I feel like people don't talk about this enough, or even his other series, which I've heard about, but I've only heard a few, so like people like shout about it from the mountains. So I feel like Robert Jackson Bennett doesn't get like the love that at least this book deserves. Like I said, there's some other series that I kind of want to mention, but I'll just save that for the future. I'll save those authors and those series for the future when I've read more and can be like, no, really, y'all are sleeping on this. Get on it. So that is it for some underrated, in my opinion, authors and books. Like I said, I'm not saying people don't know about them. I'm just saying they don't love them and have them in as high of esteem as they should. So comment below, let me know some authors or series or books that you feel fall into this underrated category. So thank you all for watching, and I'll see all of you guys soon. Bye.